In our time together for the next few mornings, I'd like for us to look at what the Bible says about how to actually live the Christian life that is pleasing to God. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Monday. We know there are numerous laws in the Old Testament handed down to Moses about living within the strict guidelines of God's rules for his chosen people. Well, there are also many reminders in the New Testament about how the Christian needs to live to be pleasing to God, which should be our greatest desire in life as a follower of Jesus Christ. One such list of imperatives was given to the church at Colossae in Colossians chapter 3 by the Apostle Paul. He says in verse 5, "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. In these you too once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away: anger and wrath and malice and slander and obscene talk from your mouth." We find here a whole laundry list of actions, desires, and even mental attitudes that we need to work to avoid when we're seeking to live a life devoted to Christ. But one thing that sticks out in this list is the phrase, "put to death those things." Paul is not saying these things might be a little problematic for the Christian. He's also not making some suggestions for looking like a Christian on the outside. He is actually telling the believer that these things cannot be a part of our life if we're going to be pleasing to God, whether it's in actions or even in thoughts, lest we incur God's wrath. He begins with abstaining from sexual immorality, impurity, and passion, which these three topics seem to be what the world is throwing at us all the time. The world doesn't see a problem with sexual immorality. It's a normal lifestyle. And impurity is not in their vocabulary because to the vile sinner, he doesn't seek anything to be pure in his life. And for that matter, passion is sold in large quantities on every television show, on every movie, even in commercials, as though that uncontrollable part of our minds and our hearts is what the world is playing on to draw us into their culture. Paul warns about evil desire, which the world feeds on, wanting us to long for the things of the world and to follow after Satan's delights in our daily pursuits. And covetousness. Covetousness is an evil that is spoken of in the Ten Commandments, so God takes it very seriously and wants us to rather to be content with what he gives us. He even says that covetousness is actually idolatry, putting other things in front of God himself. He reminds us that these topics are the reason for the coming of God's wrath. And he readily admits that these things used to be our regular lifestyle, but they should no longer be a part of our life. We must put these things to death, eradicate them from our heart and our mind, along with anger and malice and slander and any obscene thing that once came from our mouth. It seems like what Paul is saying is the way that you once lived, the way that the world lives now, is not acceptable before God. So stop it. Put those things to death. Make sure that our life is not tainted by all of these things that the world does. Bury them in the same hole where we placed that old self whenever we became a Christian. And instead, let's strive to live for God.